He had always believed there would be time. Time to teach them things, time to tell them stories, time to watch them grow into who they were meant to be. Harold had built his life on the steady belief that tomorrow would always come. But now, at 80 years old, he often sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the days pass more quickly than he liked, and wondered if tomorrow might not be as certain as it once seemed. His grandchildren filled the house with life when they visited, laughter, energy, endless curiosity, and every time they ran into his arms, he felt something deeper than love. He felt the fear that one day they would run, and he wouldn't be there. Harold wasn't afraid of dying. He had made peace with that long ago. What kept him awake at night, what weighed on him in the quiet moments, was the fear of being forgotten, of becoming a vague memory in their young minds, a smiling face in old photos, a voice they couldn't quite remember. He didn't want that. He wanted to be a part of their stories, part of their lives in a way that would stay with them long after he was gone. He had always dreamed of taking them on a trip, not just a visit to the park or an afternoon at the movies, something real, something big. He imagined the open road stretching out before them, the sun on their faces, the car filled with music and laughter. He pictured himself telling them stories about places they had never seen, watching their eyes light up as they discovered the world with him by their side. But dreams like that were easy when you were younger, when your knees didn't ache, and your energy didn't fade by mid-afternoon. Now, it seemed almost impossible. Almost. Harold wasn't ready to let the fear of time take away his chance to create something lasting. Every time his grandchildren left after a visit, waving from the car window, he felt the urgency grow. He needed to do something now, while he still could. He needed to show them who he was, beyond the kind eyes and gentle hands. He wanted them to know his spirit, his love for life, his desire to be with them not just in small moments, but in something they would never forget. What made him believe there was still time for something unforgettable? It wasn't hope. It was the understanding that the most important things in life aren't about how much time you have, but what you do with the time you're given. Harold didn't want to wait anymore. He didn't want to let another day pass thinking about what could be. He wanted to make it real. He just needed to find the strength to turn that dream into a memory they'd all carry forever. When Harold was a young man, he didn't think much about time. Life felt endless back then, stretched out before him like a long summer afternoon. He believed there would always be more of it, more days to work, more nights to laugh, more years to build the kind of life he'd always imagined. What mattered most to him, even in his 20s, was family. He came from a small one, just his parents and a younger sister, and from an early age he dreamed of having a big, bustling home filled with children, with noise, with love. He met Margaret when he was just 23. She was smart, kind, and laughed in a way that made Harold feel like anything was possible. They married young, like many did in those days, and set out to build that life together. In the early years, it was all about hard work. Harold took whatever jobs he could find, first in construction, then later in the post office, where he eventually spent most of his career. Margaret stayed home when their first child was born, then the second, and later, a third. Their house was never fancy, but it was full of stories, full of warmth. Harold loved being a father. He was the kind who told bedtime stories even when he was exhausted, who showed up to every school play and little league game, who spent his weekends fixing bikes and teaching his kids how to build things with their hands. He believed in showing love through time, through presence. Things break, he used to say, but memories don't. As the years passed, his children grew, as they always do. They moved out, built lives of their own, and Harold felt the house quiet a little more with each step they took away from it. But he was proud of who they'd become, proud of the family he and Margaret had made. Still, something lingered, a wish, almost. He hoped, one day, to have grandkids. He imagined teaching them the same things he had taught his children. He imagined big family dinners, holidays with kids running through the house again, the sound of laughter filling every corner. And in time, the grandkids came. 3 of them, one after another, and Harold felt his heart grow in ways he didn't expect. He adored them, their questions, their energy, the way they looked at the world like everything was new. Being a grandfather was different, softer. He didn't have to teach them everything, just enough. He didn't have to raise them, but he could shape them in small, lasting ways. He always said he wanted to take them on a trip, one big adventure before they got too old to want to spend that kind of time with him. He thought there would be plenty of time. But now, at 80, with his body not as strong as it once was, he wasn't so sure. Time, he realized, was no longer endless. And he wasn't ready to waste what he had left. Harold had always been a strong man. Not in the loud, boastful way some men were, but in the steady, dependable way that people relied on without even thinking. He was the kind of man who carried groceries for neighbors without being asked, who fixed broken steps and leaky faucets with hands that had worked hard for decades. But now, at 80, he felt his strength slipping in small but undeniable ways. It started with little things. Getting up from his chair took more effort. His morning walks, once brisk and refreshing, became slower, shorter. He found himself forgetting why he'd walked into a room, standing there for a moment, trying to remember what he needed. His hands, once so sure, would tremble just slightly when he tried to hold something delicate. At first, he told no one. Not Margaret, not his children, not even his doctor. He didn't want them to worry, didn't want to hear the usual response, "You need to take it easy, Dad." That was the last thing Harold wanted, to take it easy, to slow down, to sit back and let the rest of life pass by without him. But the worst part wasn't the aches or the fatigue. It was the fear that he wouldn't have enough time. Enough time to truly know his grandchildren, to share stories with them, to see them grow into teenagers, into adults. Every time he saw them, laughing, playing, growing taller, smarter, more curious, he felt that fear press harder on his chest. He loved watching them. The way Emily, the oldest, always had her nose in a book, asking questions about everything she read. The way Tommy, with boundless energy, wanted to know how things worked, how cars ran, how trees grew, how to make a kite fly higher. And little Sophie, with her wide eyes and soft voice, who just wanted to be near him, holding his hand as they walked through the yard. Harold couldn't imagine a world without them. Couldn't imagine not being there to see Emily graduate, to teach Tommy how to fix things, to hear Sophie laugh as she played in the garden. But deep inside, he feared he might miss those moments. He feared that the ticking clock wasn't just in his mind, it was real, and it was loud. That's when the idea of the trip came back to him, stronger than ever. He had talked about it before, mentioned it in passing over dinner, always met with smiles and nods. But now, it wasn't just a nice thought. It was something he needed, not just for them, but for him. He needed to make memories that would outlive him. He needed to give them something they would carry forever. And he needed to do it now, before time made the decision for him. The idea of the trip was no longer just a dream tucked away in Harold's mind. It became something he thought about every day, in the quiet moments between the visits, in the early mornings when the house was still, and especially at night, when the weight of time seemed to press heavier on his chest. He pictured the places they could go, the roads they would travel together, the laughter they would share along the way. But more than that, he pictured the feeling, the sense of togetherness, of adventure, of giving his grandchildren something they would never forget. He didn't want the trip to be just a vacation. He wanted it to be an experience, something filled with meaning. He wanted them to see him not just as Grandpa Harold, the one who sat in the corner during family gatherings, but as someone who still had stories to tell, lessons to teach, love to give. And he wanted to see them, really see them, outside of the short visits and quick hugs. He wanted to know who they were becoming. Harold knew he had to be realistic. He wasn't the man he once was. He couldn't drive long distances anymore, and walking for hours would leave him tired for days. But there had to be a way. Something manageable, something that would let him keep up while still creating those moments he craved. He thought about when he was younger, about the road trips he used to take with Margaret and the kids. They would pile into the old Ford, packed with sandwiches and suitcases, and head off without much of a plan. Those were some of the happiest days of his life. Maybe, just maybe, he could do something like that again on a smaller scale, of course. A few days, somewhere not too far, but far enough to feel like a real adventure. One afternoon, while flipping through an old photo album, Harold stopped on a picture from a trip he and Margaret had taken to the coast many years ago. The ocean stretched out behind them, endless and calm, and he remembered how peaceful it had felt to stand there, hand in hand with her, watching the waves roll in. That's when it came to him. The coast. A trip to the sea. He could take the grandkids to the ocean, show them the place that had meant so much to him, let them feel the wind on their faces, hear the sound of the waves, see the vastness of something so beautiful and timeless. It didn't have to be complicated. Just a few days by the water, a small cottage, some time to walk along the beach and talk. He could do that, and they would remember. Harold knew that if he wanted this trip to happen, he would have to tell them, his children, his grandchildren. The idea of it made him nervous. Not because he didn't believe in the plan, but because he feared what they might say. He could already hear their concerns. Dad, are you sure you're up for this? What if it's too much? Maybe we should wait until next summer. But waiting was exactly what Harold didn't want to do. He'd waited long enough, and time wasn't something he could bargain with anymore. One Sunday afternoon, when the family gathered for their usual meal, Harold decided it was time. The house was filled with the familiar sounds of clinking dishes, children's laughter, and soft conversation. He sat in his usual spot at the head of the table, watching them all, his son Michael, always practical and thoughtful, his daughter Susan, kind-hearted and protective, and the grandkids, full of life, filling the room with energy he could almost feel in his bones. After dessert, as the conversation slowed, Harold cleared his throat. His voice, though softer than it used to be, still carried a weight that made them pause. "I've been thinking about something," he began, looking around the table. "I'd like to take the grandkids on a trip." There was a brief silence, then a mix of reactions. Michael raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Susan. Emily, the oldest grandchild, leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Where to, Grandpa?" Harold smiled, steady. "To the coast. I want to show you where your grandmother and I used to go. It's a special place, and I'd like to share it with you while I still can." Susan was the first to speak, her voice gentle. "Dad, that's a beautiful idea, but are you sure? It's a long trip, and you've been so tired lately." "I'm sure," he said, firmer now. "I know I can't do things the way I used to, but this isn't something I want to put off. I want to make these memories with them now, not later." Michael sighed, thoughtful. "We just want to make sure you're okay, that it's not too much." Harold nodded. "I've thought about that. I'm not planning anything big or hard. Just a few days by the ocean. I'll take it slow, but I need to do this." Emily spoke next, her voice full of excitement. "I'd love to go, Grandpa. We all would." The other grandchildren nodded eagerly, their enthusiasm lighting up the room. Seeing their faces, Harold felt a warmth spread through him. Susan and Michael still looked uncertain, but they could see how much this meant to him. "All right," Susan finally said. "Let's figure it out. We'll help with whatever you need." Harold smiled, the weight in his chest easing. The trip was no longer just a dream. It was happening. Harold hadn't felt this kind of anticipation in years. There was a nervous energy in his steps now, a purpose that had been missing for far too long. Planning the trip gave him something to hold on to, something to look forward to. Each morning, after his tea, he would sit at the kitchen table with a notepad, jotting down ideas and lists, what to pack, places they might visit along the coast, little things he wanted the grandkids to see and experience. He called the small inn by the ocean, the same one he and Margaret had stayed at decades ago. To his surprise, it was still there, still run by the same family. When he heard the familiar voice on the other end of the phone, memories flooded back. Walking along the shore with Margaret, the two of them watching the waves crash against the rocks, dreaming about the future. "I'd like to book 2 rooms, Harold said, his voice steady, "for me and my grandchildren." As the days moved closer to their departure, Harold felt both excitement and a quiet anxiety. His body reminded him daily that he was no longer the man who had carried his kids on his shoulders, or who could drive for hours without stopping. He worried about slowing the trip down, about being a burden instead of the guide he wanted to be. But every time doubt crept in, he thought about why he was doing this for them, yes, but also for himself. He needed to know he still could, that he still had something to give. Susan and Michael helped with the practical things, booking a rental car big enough for all of them, making sure there were places to rest along the way, checking in with his doctor just to be safe. They still worried, of course, but Harold could see in their eyes that they understood now. This wasn't just about a trip. It was about holding on to the time they had, about creating something real, something lasting. The grandchildren were bursting with excitement. Emily asked questions constantly, wondering what the ocean would look like, what they would do there. Tommy, ever curious, wanted to know how waves worked and whether they could build sandcastles. Sophie packed and repacked her small bag, filling it with treasures to show Grandpa: books, drawings, little notes. The night before they left, Harold sat alone in the living room, looking at an old photograph of Margaret. He held it gently, thinking of how proud she would be, how much she would have loved to see him do this. "We're going, love," he whispered. "We're finally going." And for the first time in a long time, Harold didn't feel like time was running out. He felt like it was just beginning. The morning of the trip, Harold woke before the sun. The house was still dark, filled with that soft, expectant quiet that only comes before something special. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle over him, not as a burden, but as a promise. Today was the day, the start of something he had waited so long for. He moved slowly, dressing carefully, choosing a soft sweater that Margaret had once given him, the one she said brought out the color in his eyes. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, and the air was crisp with the coolness of early morning. Susan arrived first, her car packed and ready, the grandchildren still rubbing the sleep from their eyes but buzzing with excitement. Emily ran up to him first, hugging him tight. "We're really going, Grandpa," she said, her voice bright. Tommy followed, carrying a small backpack almost bigger than him, and Sophie clung to her mother's hand, her eyes wide with wonder. Harold climbed into the front seat, his heart full. The road stretched out ahead of them, and for the first time in years, he wasn't just going through the motions of a day, he was moving towards something meaningful. The drive was filled with music, laughter, and stories. Harold told them about the first time he and Margaret had driven this same road, how they got lost and ended up finding a tiny diner with the best pie they'd ever tasted. The kids listened, wide-eyed, asking questions, giggling at the thought of their grandparents as young and adventurous. As the miles passed, Harold felt the tension in his body ease. He watched the landscape change, the flat fields giving way to rolling hills, the trees growing taller, the air smelling fresher. And with each mile, the doubts he had carried began to fade. He could do this. He was doing this. They stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, just like in his stories, and Harold sat with them, feeling more like himself than he had in years. The waitress, noticing the joy at their table, smiled warmly. "Family trip?" she asked. "The best kind," Harold replied. By late afternoon, they arrived at the coast. The ocean greeted them with open arms, the sound of waves crashing gently, the salty breeze wrapping around them like an old friend. Harold stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The sea, endless and blue, the sky painted with the soft colors of the setting sun, and beside him, the laughter of his grandchildren filling the air. He had made it. They had made it. And as they walked down to the shore, their footprints mingling in the sand, Harold knew that this was more than just a trip. This was everything he had hoped for. The days they spent by the ocean felt like they existed outside of time. From the moment Harold stepped onto the beach with his grandchildren, he felt the world slow down, as if giving him the space he had longed for, the chance to truly be with them, fully present, without the rush of life pushing him forward. The sound of the waves became the rhythm of their days, constant, soothing, grounding. Each morning, they woke early to the golden light pouring through the windows of their small cottage, the salty breeze already slipping in through the cracks. Harold took them on slow walks along the shore, their feet sinking into the cool sand, the children darting ahead to collect shells and smooth stones. Sophie clutched his hand, careful not to stray too far, while Tommy ran ahead, shouting with joy every time he found something interesting. Emily stayed close, asking him about the sea, about the times he had come here with Margaret. He told her stories, letting the memories spill out like the tide, painting pictures of the past and the fresh air of the present. They spent hours just being together, sitting on a blanket, eating simple meals, watching the gulls wheel overhead. Harold taught them how to skip stones, how to build sturdy sandcastles, and how to listen for the changes in the waves. In those moments, he didn't feel 80. He didn't feel tired or old. He felt like a grandfather who still had so much to give. One afternoon, they visited the lighthouse at the edge of the shore. It was a place Harold had loved, with its wide view of the ocean stretching endlessly. He hesitated at first, unsure if he could manage the path, but the kids urged him gently, walking at his pace, never rushing. When they reached the top, the wind stronger there, Harold looked out and felt something shift inside him. The fear, the doubt, it seemed so small from up here. Below, the world was wide and open, and beside him, his grandchildren stood in awe, sharing the view, sharing the moment. That night, as the sun dipped low, they sat around a small fire on the beach. The sky turned deep shades of orange and pink, and the stars began to appear, one by one. Tommy asked Harold if he'd ever wished on a star. He smiled. "Once or twice," he said. "But I think some wishes you make by living them." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound, the waves gently crashing in the distance. Harold looked at their faces, lit by the soft glow, and felt a fullness in his chest that words couldn't hold. He had feared he wouldn't have time, feared he would leave too soon, that they wouldn't remember him. But here they were. And this would stay with them forever. As the final morning of their trip arrived, Harold woke before the others, the soft light of dawn just beginning to stretch across the sky. The cottage was quiet, filled with the gentle rhythm of sleeping breaths and the distant sound of the waves rolling onto the shore. He sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the ocean in shades of gold and silver. It felt like the world was holding its breath, giving him one last peaceful moment to take it all in. The days they had spent together had been more than he could have hoped for. Every worry he had about not being enough, not having enough time, had faded into the background. What mattered now wasn't how long he had, but how deeply he had lived these days. He had laughed, he had told stories, he had walked beside them and watched them see the world with wonder. And they had seen him too, not just as an old man, but as someone full of life, full of love. When the children woke, there was a quietness in them too, as if they knew this day was different. They ate breakfast together, packed their bags slowly, and took one last walk to the beach. Harold held Sophie's hand, while Emily and Tommy ran ahead, their laughter softer now, but still bright. They reached the same spot where they had built their first sandcastle, now washed away by the tides. Harold stood there, watching the ocean, and felt no sadness, only gratitude. As they turned to leave, Tommy ran back, picking up a small, smooth stone from the sand. "For you, Grandpa," he said, pressing it into Harold's hand. "So you remember this place." Harold smiled, his fingers closing around the stone. "I won't forget." The drive home was quiet, filled with comfortable silences and shared smiles. When they arrived, Susan and Michael were waiting, ready to hear every detail. The children talked endlessly about the beach, the lighthouse, the fire under the stars. And Harold sat back, listening, knowing that the memories were already taking root in them. That night, alone again in his home, Harold placed the stone on the shelf beside a photo of Margaret. He sat for a while, looking at it, feeling the weight of it in his palm once more. He had feared he wouldn't have time, but he realized now that he had made the time that mattered. He had given them something they would carry always. And in doing so, he had given himself peace. Harold had always thought time was something you could hold on to if you were careful enough. If you moved slowly, lived simply, stayed close to home, maybe, just maybe, the days would stretch. But now he understood. Time wasn't meant to be held. It was meant to be spent, shared, given away to the people who matter most, in moments that didn't need to be perfect, only real. He had feared that he wouldn't live long enough to make a difference in his grandchildren's lives, that he would fade before they knew who he truly was. But standing on that shore, holding their hands, hearing their laughter, he knew better. He didn't need years to leave something behind. He needed memories. He needed love. And now he had given them both. As he sat in his favorite chair, the stone from the beach warm in his hand, he thought of Margaret, of the life they had built, of the quiet promises they had made to each other, to live well, to love deeply, to never waste what they had been given. He had kept that promise in his own way. And now he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He didn't know how much time he had left, but he knew it didn't matter. Because what he feared most, being forgotten, being left behind, would never happen. Not now. His grandchildren would carry this trip in their hearts, in their stories, in the way they looked at the world. They would remember the way he smiled at the ocean, the way he told them about love and patience, the way he made them feel seen, cherished. And maybe one day they would tell their own children about a man named Harold, who at 80 took them on the trip of a lifetime, who showed them that love doesn't have to be loud or grand or perfect. It just has to be given, fully and without fear. If you've come this far, maybe you felt what Harold felt. Maybe you've looked at the people you love and wondered if they know, truly know, how much they mean to you. Don't wait. Time is precious, not because it lasts forever, but because it doesn't. Make the memory now. Take the trip. Say the words. Because it's never too late to give someone something they'll carry forever. And it's never too late to dream. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Share a memory or a dream you still hope to live. Like this video if you believe love makes us eternal. And subscribe to join us in celebrating the people who show us that life's most beautiful moments are the ones we choose to create. Because the time to live is now.